The Comptroller and Auditor General has flagged off the increased use of off-budget financing by the government. According to the National Auditor, the centre has used several means that would fall outside the purview of the budget to finance subsidy arrears, all the while maintaining deficit targets. To understand the risks involved, let's welcome in former Finance Secretary S Narayan. He joins us on the phone line. Dr. Narayan, thank you so much for joining us today. Firstly, the auditors clearly frowned upon the increased use of the off-budget route for financing and for capital spending as well. In your experience, what are the risks involved here? Where can it be used and where should it not be used?
First, we must understand that this report of the CAG, which he's talking about, is talking of 4 years prior to 2016-17. Which means he is talking about a period from 2012 to about 2016. So we must understand that it clearly overlaps the financial regimes of two separate governments. That is point number one. Point number two is, at the end of it, they are saying three things. They are saying that subsidies has not been provided for fully, and subsidies are being paid out of NABARD or whatever it is. So, but what we have to look at is the total debt of the government with reference to GDP. Normally, we work on overall something like a 50% debt GDP ratio, but today they are saying that you have gone above that to about 55. My numbers may be a little bit wrong, but what I gleaned from the report is, they are saying, okay, it is exceeding by about 5% or so. Okay, so yes, it is in a way a cautionary, but is it something to be seriously frowned upon? I would put a question mark on that, because even in the past 60 or 70 years, there have been several occasions when government have resorted to off-budget borrowing, budgetary adjustments, I won't use the word borrowing, budgetary adjustments to make sure that their revenue commitments are met. So long as they adjust it, so long as the fiscal deficit goes back to 3.3 or 3%, etc., over a period of time, I think government is in a good corrective mode.
Dr. Narayan, good afternoon. This is Ira joining in. I have a slightly more specific question. I take your point on the broader picture that you have to keep the broader debt to GDP in mind. But so two examples that the CAG gives. One is on fertilizer subsidy and the other is on food subsidy. 2 points it makes. One is that in every year the carryover liability is quite substantial compared to the actual subsidy amount, both previous years and that year's carryover. And then you finance it through, say, special banking arrangements, etc. I want to understand whether that is common or not. Firstly, the carryover of a large amount of subsidy from one year to the next, and then to finance it through, say, special banking arrangements in the case of fertilizer subsidies.
Let me give you specific answers. You see, if you look at the pattern of a fertilizer subsidy, there has been a carryover as far as I know from 1984 onwards. The carryovers may be small, carryovers may be large, but I cannot recall a single year where on the 31st of March, all fertilizer subsidies have been settled. So yes, a carryover, has been going on for quite some time. The number is really, you have to look at a 30,000 crore number with reference to what is a fertilizer subsidy which was supposed to go. And if that is a substantial portion of this, if the numerator is a substantial portion of the denominator, then you have to worry, saying why is 60% of subsidy not paid out, 70% not paid out, etc. So I don't have that number, so I cannot judge this 30,000, but a carryover is fairly common. And the off-budget, you must recall that the biggest off-budget thing was done sometime in the late 90s when the oil companies could not be paid their dues from the pricing mechanism, and the government permitted them to raise bonds, and those bonds they could sell. That is a huge off-budget mechanism that they adopted. Luckily, the oil price corrected, it went up, and then that could be settled. Another huge thing was, if you recall earlier, the kind of off-budget mechanism for settling UTI debt, which is about 10,000 crores. Yes, So these are mechanisms available to government, but so long as government has a strategy of closing this bubble, of really pricking the bubble and getting out of it, it's fine. If they don't have it, if they just want to kick the can down the road, if that is the kind of fiscal planning they are doing, then it's very, very serious.
Dr. Narayan, just to follow up, because, I have those numbers from the CAG report of what the subsidy expenditure was and what the carryover liability was. And again, this is across administrations because it goes back to 12-13. So, for instance, in the latest year, which is 16-17, the subsidy expenditure on fertilizer was 70,000 crore. The carryover was 39,000 crore. In the case of food subsidy, sir, in 15-16, the food subsidy amount was 1,12,000 crore. The carryover was 50,000 crore. In 16-17, on a subsidy expenditure of 78,000 crore, the carryover amount, which probably includes previous years, was 81,000 crore. So the proportions, as you pointed out, of carryover are becoming quite large. What is an acceptable number, sir? 10%, 20%, 40%?
I would really look at how this 60% came about. So you have to look at 1 year before that. Can you tell me what is the carryover on in 13-14? Because somewhere there, something was not paid, and that has got carried over into 15-16 and 16-17, making it larger.
You're absolutely right, sir, because in the fertilizer side, 13-14's carryover was more than 50%. 71,000 was the subsidy expenditure on fertilizer. The carryover was 40,000. In the case of food, also...
So that is, I would point to that as the worst year, because 40 by 71 is, much more than 50%. And that overhang, and the next year you go to a 1 lakh, when you have a 40,000 carryover, then you're not able to pay it. But really, if you look at current year 17, 18, 18, 19, we have to look at the figure and see whether the figure is collapsing or whether the figure is expanding.
Okay.
That is what is fiscal and budget management all about.
The CAG has also sort of suggested a framework to ensure this doesn't get out of hand. What to your mind needs to be done?
No, I think the point raised by Rela is a very important point, that we should think that, okay, carryover should not exceed 20%, 30%, whatever a number the finance ministry comes up with. And then the budgeting should fit into that kind of a number. You will expect certain carryover merely because of administrative mechanism. States don't put in their claims, NABARD doesn't, various cooperative societies' claims have not come up, reconciliation happens, the companies are not happy with the numbers that are put up, etc., etc. So certain carryover will happen. I think just like you have a FRBM, so you should have a cap about subsidy carryover for particularly food, and now that oil is out of it, food and fertilizer, there should be a cap, not more than 20%, 10%, whatever. That number can be decided by the government.
Dr. Narayan, I have two more questions, sir. One relates to some of these special banking arrangements which have been talked about. Again, I want to understand whether this is out of the ordinary or not. Like, for instance, in fertilizer, they are saying that the government pays the interest up to the GSEC rate and the company pays it above that. In the case of food, I think the government has been dipping more and more into NSSF, which is actually permitted. So how much should one frown or pay attention to some of these concerns, sir?
I think the CAG is quite right to point out these as kind of more a sleight of hand rather than serious budgeting.
Okay. And my last question, Dr. Narayan, is on medium-term, sort of checks and balances, not medium-term, sorry, mid-term checks and balances. So they point out that, some of the, in the year, as you proceed in the year, there are no mid-course corrections on fiscal deficit. For instance, we've seen this very dramatically in the last 2 years. You've always exceeded the fiscal deficit target mid-year. The government says, no, it's okay. By the end of the year, we'll balance it out. But is it not more prudent to sort of have some mid-year benchmarks that can be used to course correct?
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. This year, if you look at it, they had a huge revenue projection of 14 or 18% growth. But GST has not grown 14 to 18%. So, this means a real, I would say, a lack of appreciation of what is going on in the services and the goods and services and the, I would say, indirect taxes sector. So why would you want to budget 18% and then say, I don't know, no, I have not collected only 6% and therefore my fiscal deficit is high. Why not budget properly? So I would, a moderate budget, a more realistic budget will take care of all this.